Good evening, everybody. I think I am streaming, and thank you so much for being on History, Prophecy, and Current Events. And just excited to be with you guys tonight. I'm all alone tonight. Renee is with the grandchildren, so very grateful to be with you. And tonight we're going to talk about how the nation and the nations, the nation of America and the nations, have refused to learn from history. We have refused to learn from the things that God has taught us to do as a people on the face of the earth. And we're going to talk through several different issues about why do I believe and why do many prophecy teachers and Christians believe we're right on the cusp of the rise of the Antichrist. Many believe he's alive today. There's a huge reason why I believe the Antichrist is on the earth today, and this may shock you to think about it, but um, one of the reasons is because of the increase of wars, and especially studying the military-industrial complex. When you study what has happened over the years from World War II on to today, you can see how Satan has used there's kind of covert governments in governments all over the world that have to do with murder, with war, and with starting wars and fighting wars and continuing wars to happen. And this is something that the devil is very adept at doing, and he has convinced America not to learn her lessons and to have a shadow government which is very committed to increasing wars, making money off of selling arms and weapons, and this is kind of a big thing. So just that idea of the military doing that in the back, all of the corporations that build all of these arms, these planes, these boats, these weapon systems, they have a interest in making sure that people want to buy those things, and so they want to keep wars going. And so really, since World War II, we've seen just wars and rumors of wars growing more and more and more, and that's what we see today. But I did want to start out with a passage of scripture about this. It's in Daniel chapter 11, and this is a part where he's describing what an antichrist is like. And so here, this is what he's doing. The antichrist is um, okay. Wait a minute now. I don't know if this thing's on. Oh yeah, there it is. It is on. We're on. Um, Usually Renee is the one who handles all this stuff, so hopefully I did it right. And you guys are not. I don't see anybody on the top chat. So let me see here. Yeah, I don't see anybody on top chat. So okay. So here we go. It's in Daniel chapter 11, and I'm looking at verse 38. And this is what it says here. It says, "But instead he will honor a God of fortresses, a God whom his fathers did not know. He will honor him with gold and silver and costly stones and treasures." And so here's the Antichrist. What is he doing? He's honoring the God of fortresses. He's honoring the God of war. This is the God of war, and so he's very interested in starting wars and causing wars to you know increase over the whole earth. And so Antichrist is a god of war. He's a murderer from the beginning, and this is what John 8:44 talks about. Satan, he's all about murder. He was a murderer from the beginning. And let me just read that passage to you. John 8:44. John 8:44 says this. Let me get over to it. Um, he says, "You are of your father, the devil, and you want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning and he does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. Whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own nature, for he is a liar and he is the father of lies. And so Satan has deceived America, deceived a lot of nations into believing that they need wars, and they've increased wars. And so I just want to talk about how that has happened. Um, it's very interesting that the history from World War II on and the increase of wars in the nations, all over the nations. And so, one of the things that we haven't learned from history is how to fight war. And so, President Eisenhower brought up something that's very important in 1961. This is what he said, and this was a speech by him in 1961 that was kind of his farewell speech. And this is what he said in the farewell speech. I think this is partly the reason why John F. Kennedy was killed. I'll read you a quote about that because he was against the military industrial complex. So this is what it says. It says Eisenhower said, "In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists, and it will persist." And that's kind of the interesting, note here from Eisenhower. He already saw this happen. He saw a shadow government already developing and taking place in the 1950s. And in the 1950s, this shadow government that grew in the United States and other places, this thing grew so that they could do Satan's will. Basically, that's what happened. So this whole military-industrial complex is following after, Satan's will. Why? Because he is giving gold and silver. Look, he is one who wants to push control over everybody. And so the military industrial complex began to grow. Well, how did it grow? Well, here's what's interesting about that. During World War II, we had a secret program, and it was called the Manhattan Project. And that was to build nuclear weapons. And so they started in 1939, but by 1943, there was a guy named Robert Oppenheimer, and he moved down to New Mexico, actually near Area 51. And Los Alamos, this is the place where they did a lot of their secret testing of all of these things. And it's interesting because, they didn't want the Germans to find out how they were doing this, but when they were working on this, obviously they had to keep secret. And Area 51 became part of the place where they tested the nuclear bombs. And so that place became, obviously, for many Americans, it was a place that you know that they kept secrets. And it had to be a place of secrecy. But what I kind of believe about that, though, is that once you begin down that road, not just keeping secrets, but really, trying to keep secrets from each other in our own government. That's where it began to cross the line. So, at the end of World War II, the CIA started what they call Operation Paperclip, and they brought 1,500 Nazis to the United States to help work on these weapons programs at Area 51 in different places, NASA, all these places. Now, if the American people knew that these Nazis, some of them were at concentration camps using Jews as experiments, murdering Jews, the whole bit. If they had known those things, there was no way, I don't think America would have the American people would not have allowed this compromise with evil. So Operation Paperclip was a horrible thing, a horrible compromise. But that's an interesting thing because the reason why that took place, though, was to move the ball along to the end times. Why? Because God was already bringing Jews back to the land, and He was about to establish them in 1948 as a nation. Satan knew that. So Satan had to start establishing his kingdom. You see what I'm saying? He needed to move the ball along for the nations to get closer and closer to that final kingdom, that final 10 horned kingdom that the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation talks about. So I brought some books with me that I've read. This is the one that's really, really interesting. It's called Area 51. Okay, it's an uncensored history of America's top secret military base by Annie Jacobson. Now, obviously, a lot of people, we know that one of the things that they were testing there, they were testing, planes, no doubt about it. They were testing nuclear, weapons and those types of things. And there was a battle that came up. This battle between the CIA and the Air Force. And as that battle grew, what happened was that the people who want to make these weapons got stronger and stronger and stronger. And one of the men who objected to them was General Curtis LeMay. Now, General Curtis LeMay, just a phenomenal general. He was a general in the Pacific Theater near during World War II. One of the generals that was there, and he was over the Air Force, and he was the one who helped us beat the Japanese. And when he saw what they were doing there to build an airplane, they were trying to build a plane that would be a spy plane. That was what we call the U-2, if you guys remember that. He wanted in on that because he thought it was a very, very bad thing that the military itself would the decisions about the military would be in the hands of civilians, and then in the hands of these contractors and these companies. And remember what we talked about a few weeks ago, that there's no doubt about the fact that the 10 Kings Rising, I think, could really be the heads of 10 types of corporations, something like that. And you could see how that would happen here, in the military industrial complex. You could see how, they are really working very, 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 very hard to keep this ball rolling and making tons of money off of selling arms to all kinds of people. Obviously, right now they're selling billions and billions of dollars of arms into the Ukraine, and that's making these people a lot of money. But they don't just sell it there; they sell it all over the place. So in Area 51, it's kind of interesting. She brings up the fact that this caused all kinds of tensions, and it caused real problems in the country. And so Curtis LeMay wrote a book about it. Here's his book, and this is a book by the general. And here's the interesting thing that what he wrote. He said, "America is in danger. America's in danger." And so, in this book, in many places, he was just a brilliant, brilliant general. And he's making a case, in this, that you cannot have a military industrial complex run the country because it will be abusive to the country. So how do we know that? How, as Christians, how do we know that that's true? Well, here's the reason why. God is the one who set the pattern of nations. God is the one who set the pattern for militaries and why you need a military. And God set the rules for fighting wars. And so I want to turn to Deuteronomy 17 with you. In Deuteronomy 17, God is speaking about the king and what the king ought to do. And he does give later the rules for wars, what you ought to do in war. But this is very instructive for us in Deuteronomy 17, when he instructs the kings and what they're supposed to do, he tells us about the military and what should happen. So let's go there real quick. Chapter 17. And we're going to start Deuteronomy 17. Okay, let's see what verse I want to start. Start in verse 14. He says, when you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it, and you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations who are around me, you shall surely set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose, one from among your countrymen, and you shall set as king over yourselves. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. So here he's talking about something very basic. First, it's a prophecy about how this was going to take place. Because he says, when you say, we want a king like all of the nations, well, that happened. And First Samuel, right? First Samuel 8, Samuel was angry with the people because he said they want a king like all of the nations. Well, this was the prophecy. And then they did it. And then God gave him a king. He gave him Saul. That's the king you don't want. God said, okay, I'll give you a king like that, an evil king. And then he gave him David, and that was the great king. But then he says this, and this is very important. He says, you can't put a foreigner over you. It has to be one of your own countrymen, meaning there is citizenship of your own country. And I think that's an important point for today because it seems like non-citizens of America have more rights than citizens in America. And that's a tragedy. You can't be a nation unless your people, your citizens have rights from your government that God established. And when non-citizens have more rights than the citizens, then your nation's over. Now, this is something that the left has done to our country. But then he says, moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor shall he cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never again turn that way. So God did not want them to have a military industrial complex. Don't increase these horses. That's a way of saying we don't want to increase the military, and you don't need to go to Egypt to do this. And so God says don't do that. Well, God does not want us to waste our tax money on building, huge militaries. Why? Because, God is the one who will protect you. If you put your hope and dreams in the Lord, you can have a military, but he will give you the direction that you need, whether you need to fight or not. And he will protect you if you walk with the Lord. But if you have no protection from the Lord, if you have no belief in the Lord, then obviously you need a big army because anything can happen. People are just going to treat each other with very unethical and wicked, in wicked and unethical ways. And so those are the things that, we know that has happened in our country. We've denied the law of the Lord. We denied the truth of what God says about these things, about citizenship and about the military. And so we don't even fight wars anymore according to the way that God wants us to fight them. And so the military industrial complex, has definitely grown to the place that it's taken over. So presidents even began to feel threatened by it. Okay, and so there's a book a friend of mine gave me that I've been reading through. It's called A Family of Secrets, about the Bushes, the Bush dynasty, and there are some interesting conversations here about John F. Kennedy and kind of later about Nixon, that they feared the military industrial complex and they saw what it was doing. And so here's just a quote from the book. It says, on June 10th, 1963, in a speech at American University in Washington, D.C., the president took a direct shot at the military industrial complex by announcing support for the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which prohibited above ground and underwater nuclear weapon tests. Kennedy had been stunned to learn of the human cost of radioactive fallout. You mean it's the rain out there? He asked a nuclear advisor while watching rain fall outside the Oval Office. Yes, Mr. President, the official had answered. But the nuclear arms race was another bonanza for business, uranium mining operations in particular. These constituted a growing share of earnings for oil exploration and resource extraction industry. And decades later, the George Bush Dick Cheney administration will pull the United States out of the treaty regime they had begun with the Test Ban Treaty. This would be one of the many instances in which the Bushes fulfilled objectives long harbored by Kennedy's right wing enemies. Texas had been the center of the uranium mining industry since the 1920s, and Kennedy administration wanted to put a stop to it. So you can see how there was a lot of business stuff going on, and then there was real tension against that. They weren't going to stop that. So likewise, later in the book, he said this is what happened in the Nixon administration. Eventually, the Nixon administration would discover that the military had its own powerful back channels to all of these things. And so they had back channels to business and to doing their things and starting wars that couldn't be stopped by the presidents. And we can see that now, that's been happening. That's been a very big thing. And so, what is happening today? Well, you see the laundering of money. You see the military complex pushing, selling arms all over the world to push these wars that it says in Daniel chapter 11. It says it in Matthew 24. Jesus said there's going to be wars and rumors of wars all the way to the end. Okay? And Satan himself, Antichrist himself, is going to be a man of war. He's going to worship the God of fortresses to bring war. And so I want to step back a little bit and just ask a question. Well, what have we learned from the wars? What have we learned? Well, one of the things we learned is that in World War II, Patton was a very brilliant general. And when he was given the Third Army, he did something that was amazing, but it was good military doctrine what he did. And what he did was he took his army, his tanks, and he went as fast as he could into areas where the Germans were not. So he would take land, and he would kill people along the way, and the Germans along the way. But he was interested in speed. Okay, he was interested in taking land and making the enemy kind of chase him. Why? Because he had a superiority of force. And so let me read from. I wrote about this today, and I want to read a little bit about what I said about this, because this was something that was being done by Sherman in the Civil War. And then of course Patton had the Sherman tank, which is kind of interesting. But before World War II, the American commanders were indoctrinated in two fighting traditions. First, they learned from the Civil War to find the enemy, surround them, and have a knockout blow. And second, they learned to be mobile, go fast, and destroy the enemy's ability to fight. These were the strategies General Grant and General Sherman used in the Civil War. And General Patton was like General Sherman in that he was very mobile, took more land and people than any general in history. And the U.S. Army would, if they would have adopted his ways, the war would have been over before the end of 1944. Just think about this. When they went in, June, and invaded into France, if they'd adopted what Patton was doing, that war would have been over. But, they gave they gave Montgomery the north, so he only had 500 miles to get into Germany. And it was over 800 miles for Patton to do it. And Patton beat him. And the reason was because the way he was doing it was a lot like Sherman, the way he took the South. And what he had was we had military superior firepower in the air. So as the Germans had to adjust to come at us, Boom, boom, boom. Here comes our Air Force, taking them down and taking them out. And we were destroying the enemy as we went because we made them, react to what we were doing. And it's terrible that Eisenhower stopped them. Eisenhower wanted to go slow, and he didn't understand, what it meant to be a warrior and to win a war. He didn't understand military strategy as well as Patton, and he didn't understand that. Thank God he didn't stop Curtis LeMay, in the Pacific region, because he was the same way. That several of the generals in the Pacific were like Patton. They were following this military doctrine so that they could win. And let me give you an example of that. They weren't going to every island. They skipped islands where all the Japanese were. They hit key islands to get them close enough where their bombers could bomb Japan. And so they left these Japanese over there on that island. They didn't care about them. They went, skipped to another one. Then they went to another one. And it was very strategic. It was the same thing Patton was doing, but thank God nobody stopped them, so that they could bring, an end to that war. Well, that's what God talks about in the rules of war in the Bible. And so now, when you don't learn these lessons from history, what you see happening is not only do you get hurt by it, but you begin to adopt Satan's ways of doing things. You go against the truth. You go against the way God has been leading nations. So think of this passage for a second with me. This is Psalm 67, okay? It says this: "Let the nations be glad and sing for joy. For thou wilt judge the peoples with uprightness and guide the nations on earth." God had been guiding the nations towards the truth. And what happens? The nations rebel against the truth. But the truth is there. Basically, it was like this: God established truth, and then he weaved it into nations. And you can do the history studies with me at some other time. But then what happens is those nations rebel against the truth. And the greatest picture of all the rebellion against God and how he's taught the nations is in the end times what we see today. Go to the UN. And if you could take the Christian worldview and lay it out and then see what those nations want, it's horrible. They don't want the truth. They don't want to live by the way God, has told us to live. And this is why we know that we're in the last times. Let me read a passage for you that kind of sums up what I see happening at the UN, in the White House, in the Congress. This would be a picture of what they are doing right now. It says, the wicked fool says in his heart that there is no God. They act corruptly. They commit abominable deeds. And there is no one who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven upon the sons of man to see if there is anyone who has insight and anyone who seeks after God. And what we say is they don't have insight. They have no insight, into these things. So what happened after World War II was we hired all these Nazis in America to come here, 1,500 Nazis. They worked in NASA. They basically took over NASA. They worked in Area 51. They developed, these super spy planes. They helped develop all these things. But what they also did was they brought the teaching and the beliefs of the Fourth Reich, came out of the Third Reich. And that's a very sad thing. I talked about this book that I read, The Nazi Billionaires. Well, one of the Nazi billionaires is the family of Klaus Schwab. And those people made lots of money off of their ties to Adolf Hitler. And so now what is he talking about? Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, they're talking about the Fourth Industrial Revolution. What is that? That's just the Fourth Reich. That's all it is. It's another satanic way of bringing the end times, what the Bible's teaching, about the end times. And so, I think we didn't learn our lessons from World War II. We went immediately into another war, and then these wars are still with us today. They just never end. So we went into Korea, and unfortunately, we still have troops there after all these years. We're funding them, and we've spent so much money on keeping that all going. This is something that God does not want for nations. And then we did Vietnam, and then it's just one after another, one after another. And now we have the Ukraine. And so it's interesting to me. Let me read a little bit what I wrote about this God of fortresses, okay, from Daniel 11:38. And because I think this really bears on what's going on in Ukraine. And I'm going to bring this back to the Ukrainian situation. The Hebrew word Ma'az, strongholds, okay, this is a God of fortresses, meaning a God of strongholds, all right? This phrase refers to Antichrist honoring military strength or power. So this is about military. And he will honor this God of fortresses, something that his fathers did not know. This is a God his fathers did not know. I think he's talking about, Israel, our founding fathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all that went into. They didn't follow a God of fortresses. Remember, when God sent them in to do war through Joshua, it was Jesus who led them and went before them, okay, to establish peace. But it was after a time. It was a time of judgment for them, a righteous judgment, because God has the right to raise up nations and bring them down and bring judgment on nations, and that's what happened there. Okay, and then it says he will honor him. So Antichrist will fortify this God of fortresses by providing a generous budget, lots of money. And that's what we see has been happening since World War II. Lots and lots and lots of money has been going into, funding arms and arms race. And this nation needs this nation needs this, so that they will fight. And then somebody pushes those nations to have war. And this is fitting in right where, Satan is working on these things. And so he says, this is the military industrial complex. This is what I believe they're doing. I think they are pushing war with Taiwan. Now think about that. If they push war with Taiwan, man, they're going to be selling a lot more arms, and it will increase profits for them tenfold, because it will spark a war between North Korea and Japan, and North Korea and South Korea, and it will blow up. And this will be good for business for all of them, but it's what Satan wants. He's a murderer from the beginning, and he wants to see a lot of people die. He wants to see them go to hell. The war in Ukraine, though, is a little bit different. I really do believe that if you're going to see the rise of the final Roman Empire, then NATO has to be taken out. And I think that this Ukrainian war is going to lead to Russia fighting NATO, and then NATO's going to collapse. And here's the reason why. I mean, just think about this, guys. I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but I've been listening to Victor Davis Hanson and some others talking about this. The French and the Germans, who are the leaders of the European Union, and they're supposed to have the best armies. They don't have armies. They don't have armies that could go fight in Ukraine and beat Russia. So who is going to go there and fight them? I don't think they're the ones who are going to do it. And if they do, they're going to get their hats handed to them. The Germans used to have 1.1 million people in their army in 1991 during the days of the Soviet Union. But, since then, they're just, they're so bought in to this leftist ideology of a socialist government that they've put all their money and having 6 weeks vacation, right? And their businesses and getting rid of gas and oil, which is crazy. I don't know how you can have a military when you don't have money and you don't have gas and oil. You're not going to be able to fuel your army to go fight. And so Germany is very depleted. They're not strong nation. They haven't been investing, in their own armies. They've been sending money for other people to have arms. Same thing's happening in France. France does not have this major military. So what good is it if you have a lot of arms but you don't have people that can train on those things and fight with them? And so the God has set this up for NATO to fall so that there can be a new military, a new revived Roman Empire, rising up. And the French President Macron even said, he wants to get rid, of the United States of America. He wants to cut off from it. He doesn't want them. He wants his own military, European military style. So they're committed to this uniting of Europe under a new Roman Empire. This is what they've been writing about. This is what they're dreaming about. This is what they've been talking about. And that's where they're pushing, all of this today. And so I look at the Ukrainians, and then what we just found out yesterday is that 2 missiles had dropped in Poland. And this is, you got to learn about this. This is very interesting. As Russia's been fighting in Ukraine, some people are saying we need to institute Article 5 from NATO. But the problem with that is Ukraine is not in NATO. So Article 5 doesn't work. They don't really care about that. Here's the problem. When those 2 missiles went into Poland, immediately they said, do Article 5 against Russia. Because they want NATO to come in and to fight. I don't think NATO's going to go in and fight. Turned out it was bogus. It wasn't 2 Russian missiles. America even admitted this later. But if you listen to our own head of our military, what he said when he got up, what he said, and this is amazing to me. I couldn't even believe I heard that. I heard him say this today. Okay, this is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Got up and said, yes, this was not Russian missiles that hit in Poland, but we blame the Russians. Well, he blamed the Russians. It wasn't their missiles. But you see, they want war with Russia because they want to take Russia out, because Russia's not going along with the globalist, mindset. They are an independent nation. They want to stay an independent nation, and they don't want people to cross their red line, which is NATO doesn't move in to Ukraine. That's why they're fighting the war, and they're going to keep fighting that war. Russia made it clear, we're going to keep fighting a war. NATO's not allowed in Ukraine, and so if Ukraine desires to be in NATO, then that's why the war is going to keep going. America, NATO refused to say that Ukraine is not going to be in NATO. So there you go. There's going to be a push. But what does the Bible teach us? You have to go with the reality of the Bible. The Bible is very clear. The Bible says Russia is going to be so strong that they're going to go with a coalition of other nations to attack the nation of Israel. So as I've watched this whole thing with Ukraine, I've seen that Russia continues to take land. Everybody said they're losing. Okay, they don't have good arms and whatever. And when the Ukrainians, captured some of their tanks, lo and behold, they had captured tanks that were used in World War II. I mean, it's like Putin is emptying out all of his old military, and they've been using that and taking those things. But at the end of the day, look at a map. What have they done? They've taken over 1/3 of the nation of Ukraine still. And so everybody's hoping that Russia will lose. But the Bible doesn't say Russia will lose. Russia will be powerful. Gog, Magog. Let's look at it. And if the reality of what you see in the world is not built on biblical truth, the truth will set you free. you're going to miss what God is doing in the world. And so God is the one who is in control of the nations, the rise and fall of the nations. Russia is going to be destroyed. Russia is going to be judged for what they have done over all these years, and God is going to judge them. And that's going to happen. But it's not going to happen the way people think. It's going to happen as Ezekiel 38 and 39 says it's going to happen. And we know God is the one judging them. Why? Because God said, I'm going to put the hook in the jaw and I'm going to drag them down. Now, when did that already start happening? When did God begin dragging Russia down to the border of Israel to fight this battle? Well, he did it in 2015. So think through with me now about this. In 2014, Ukraine began a war with the Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk region. They just started attacking them. And they passed a law said, if you speak Russian, you're no longer allowed to speak Russian. I tipped those people off. So that war began. They started it. They started attacking, and they've been fighting back and forth since 2014. And then 2050. So here, Russia's been helping fight that war against the Ukrainians. Now, what happened? In 2015, Barack Obama said, I want to get rid of the leader of Assyria, Bashar al-Assad. And he's gone. We got to get rid of him. Well, it didn't happen. Why? Because Russia went down. See what's happening? The hook in the jaw. Putin was already said his battles with America and with NATO. So he's going to counter NATO, counter America. Boom. Went down into Syria. Now, Russian troops have been there since 2015. So they're fighting in the eastern half of Ukraine, 1/3 of Ukraine. And then now they're in the nation of Syria. And they've been fighting there. And their troops are there. They have bases there. They have a military. They have a naval base. They have Air Force bases. They have Army bases. And so this is part of the hook of the jaw. So when you watch what God was doing, you see God has already got the Russians there. And so now we have, when Biden became president, he pushes this Ukraine war. He pushes it. And so Russia goes in, they called it not a war, they said it was a special military operation to take those eastern parts. They took them, they annexed them. They already had Crimea. They took all the way towards the Crimea, all of that land, took it. Okay? And they're making their way to Odessa. And then they have built an army of 300,000 people that are going to come across the border. This is what they're saying. I'm just telling you what they're saying. So as soon as it gets cold enough and the land there freezes over, they said they're going to push. Now something has to happen. Think about this, okay? Let's look at Ezekiel 38 and 39 and just see what has to happen. What is God going to do in all of this, okay? What do the Russians have to be like to pull this off in Ezekiel 38? What do they have? What kind of army do they have to have? What kind of ability do they have to have? Okay, so here it says, the word of the Lord came to me saying, Son of man, set your face towards Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal, and prophesy against him. So what is God doing? He's prophesying against this land of Russia. So if you go north of Israel, okay, you go up through Syria, okay, and you'll go through this land bridge, but that goes up eventually between the Black and Caspian Sea. That's where Georgia is right now. And this is, so you're going up by Turkey and then up that. This is how Russia comes down in that territory, okay? And so God is prophesying against them in this prophecy. All right. So then what he says, I will turn you and put hooks into your jaws and I will bring you out all of your army. So what does God do? He's going to bring all of your army. Well, they only have part of the army down in Syria. Because this battle is going to be fought in northern Israel on the border of Syria. That's where it's going to be fought. And so he's going to bring all of the army. Well, how can he bring all of the army if the majority of the Russian army today is still in Russia? They have bases over, all the way over to the Pacific. They have bases all the way over here. They're bringing 300,000 man army, and they say they're going to enter Ukraine probably in a week or two, 2 weeks, 3 weeks at most for the land to freeze over. As that big army comes in, wow, and that could be, hey, that could be over 50% of their army. What happens if they win and then they just start going south? This is what God's doing. He's putting a big hook in the jaw, and he's going to drag their army down. And then the army is going to be added to by all these other nations, all Muslim nations, right? Libya, Ethiopia, Sudan, Iran, and all of those nations, all the stands, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, all the stands are going to come. Germany, right, and Turkey. And they're going to come down against little old Israel. And why are we so close to that time? Anybody see what happened in Israel? That's right. Four groups vote. When they voted in these four groups, Likud and these other three, they got the most religious of the parties in Israel that got together to put Netanyahu back in charge. Boy, does that tick Satan off and tick the world. Do you know Satan has been about murdering children for so long? Think about this. He inspired Pharaoh to put all the baby boys to death so he could kill Moses. Then he inspired Herod to kill all the baby boys so he could kill Jesus. What do you think he's been doing all these years? He's been inspiring people to kill Jews all of these years, all of these pogroms, all of these anti-Semitic, right? That was something Satan is always doing. He's got to kill Israel. Why? First, he didn't want Jesus to come. Second, he doesn't want Jesus to come back to Israel to establish the nation of Israel through Jews. So if he can kill the Jews and there's no Jews left, then God can't do that. Jesus can't do that. And so he's been working on this for so long, and, for whatever reason, he never is successful. You know why? Because God has a plan, and God is working his plan. And so that's why World War II is so important, because what did God do? 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, but then they came coming back to the land of Israel, and they were established as a nation in 1948. And today, Satan is so angry that Netanyahu won. Why? Because he will protect the nation of Israel. And you watch what God's going to do. The West Bank, which we call Judea, Samaria, they call the West Bank. They call the West Bank because they hate the idea that this is Israeli territory. But that's what God said. They're against the living God. Israel has to annex all of that land because it is theirs. They have to take it. This is going to tick Satan off. He wants to bring them down, but God is bringing them down. Look at this is what Satan wants to kill all of them. So he's inspiring these people that way. But God wants to bring Russia down and all those people down. Why? So he could judge them. So let's look at it again. So he talks about Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, all of them, Gomer and their troops, Beth Togarmah, okay, all that area. That's up there towards above Turkey, Germany, over to the stands. All they're going to come. He said, be prepared, prepare yourself, you and all your companies that are assembled about you, and be a guard after them. So isn't it interesting that God right now is bringing so much of the Russian army to, right, the West, so they could get ready in the Ukraine to go where? South. That's why Russia has to win in this. They have to go south, but they have to be over there. They can't be in Siberia. They can't be on the Pacific. They can't be in the middle of Russia. They have to be all the way over in the Ukraine. And that's where they're heading. I mean, guys, we live in the last days. And God has already put the hook in the jaw in 2015. And constantly now, things have been happening now this last year over and over again. I don't know if you knew this, but the United States just told the FBI they have to investigate Israel. And in Congress, we have congressmen standing up. They are so angry. They want these FBI agents to resign, to be kicked out for what they're trying to do to Israel. You can say the whole world, what's Satan doing? He's pushing people to become more and more anti-Semitic, to come after. And what did the UN just do? The UN said, Israel has violated this statute, that statute, committed war crimes, da 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 da, and they want to kick all the Jews out of Judea and Samaria. And even one of the Israeli politicians agreed with this. We need to kick all Jews out of there against the Bible, against the Word of God. And then who came back to power? Netanyahu, a guy who believes the Bible, who had a Bible study every Saturday in the Prime Minister's house for the nation. You can't make this stuff up. And so, what is God going to do? He is going to pull Russia down into Israel because, and here's the big thing right here, said, it will come about in that day. This is what he said in Ezekiel 38. It will come about in that day that thoughts will come into your mind and you will devise an evil plan. Think about this. Thoughts are going to come into their mind and they're going to devise an evil plan. Satan is going to cause them to devise an evil plan. Let's just get rid of those Jews. If we get rid of them, all of the Arabs, all of the, everything will be over. We won't have this battle going on there. We can get rid of the Jews. And then the Muslims can take that land and it'll be over. Right? And he says, and you will say, I will go up against the land of unwalled villages. I will against those who are at rest, who live securely, all of them living without walls or bars or gates, to capture spoil, to seize plunder, to turn your hand against the waste places which are now inhabited, and against the people who are gathered from the nations who have acquired cattle goods, who live at the center of the world. You know what? I'm telling you what. Israel's rich, and people want those riches. And I could see Russia. They want this. They want this bad. And so this is what's been taking place, guys. So this idea that Antichrist is a god of fortresses, this idea that the United States has been in bed with the military-industrial complex. We've had this shadow government for a long time. This is all part of Satan's plan. And God is at work in all of it. And that's an exciting thing, just to see how God is doing all of these things. And so with that, I'll end. I have a lot more in my notes here, but, just enjoy talking to you about these things. And I can see in the next few weeks that Russia is going to bring more and more of her troops into Ukraine, getting ready for the hook in the jaw, getting ready for more of them to go down into Syria. Something's going to take place over the next few weeks. And I don't know when or how, but that's going to happen. And so let's pay attention to it. Did you know that banks, some of the major banks in America today, they were meeting today? And I heard about this right before I went on. They were meeting to talk about how America could go on the digital dollar through the banks, Bank of America, all these banks. Man, that's another step towards the end times, right? Digital dollar means what? Right? Put a mark on your forehead or your hand. So, hey, the corruption out there is going to get worse because of these things. So let me stop there and let me explain the gospel to you. The gospel is very simple, guys. The gospel says that God is holy and he is righteous. God is light, and in him there's no darkness at all. And he has a plan, and that plan, human beings have violated that plan. They don't, the light shines in the darkness. What do? We hate it. This is what human beings do, because the wages of sin is death. You see, and so when we sin, we get death. And all of sin and falls short of the glory of God. So we got a problem. We're sinners. We got a problem. We can't be with this God of light, this holy God, this righteous God, this loving God, because of our sin. So what did God do? Well, he provided a way. Since Adam and Eve, he provided a way. He provided the way is through the promise that your sins can be forgiven through a substitute by the shedding of blood. And Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of that promise. When Jesus came 2,000 years ago at the right time to die for the ungodly, and God says, but God demonstrates his own love toward us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And so when Christ died for us, he wants us to put our life in his hands and trust him. So he said in John 5:24, truly, truly, I say to you, he who hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life. He does not come into the judgment, but he's passed over from death to life. Now, if you were to if you hear the word of the Lord, put your hope and your trust in him, guess what? You will be saved. Why? Because God made him, Jesus, who knew no sin, to be sin on our behalf, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. So what do you have to do? Believe. Put your faith in him. Romans 10:9 says, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. And so put your hope and trust in the truth of God and the promise of God, and he will give you salvation. He'll change your life. Do it quickly, because the rapture is going to happen soon, and you don't want to be left behind. And so let me thank you guys for watching, and really appreciate everybody on tonight. Thank you.